Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Orti. I used to have the tagline where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. And now at the moment, I am just looking at books that I've enjoyed. They're usually either business books or personal or professional development. And I'm just sharing my notes, more like what I highlighted in the books. And then I just have a little bit of commentary running through it. If you want to have a look at what I've done in the past, you can go over to virtualnotdistant.com. And there, if you have a look at the books page or the coming soon, you can see what I'm up to. Talking of books, Connection and Disconnection in Remote Teams with Bri Kajati is out now. And we are looking for places, maybe podcasts or magazines or other online publications where we can promote the book by sharing some of the insights. So do let me know if you can think of any, or if you are interested indeed of having us on your show, Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. And that's enough about me and my work. I think I've got a bit of a cold or something, so if I sound particularly congested, I can't hear myself properly. So anyway, it should all be okay, people. Now, for this show, I am looking at a book that I really enjoyed. It's called Code Dependent: How AI is Changing Our Lives by Madhumita Murgia. And it doesn't look at generative AI. So it's not about ChatGPT and the LLM models. It's looking at the broader impact of artificial intelligence. And when I read the book, the first thing I thought was, wow, it's just everywhere. And the issues that are coming to light now have been issues for a very long while. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this book now is that I use a lot of generative AI. I don't use a lot of it. I use it a lot. And I used to have a newsletter, I think it lasted for about a year, called Spiraling Creativity, where I shared how I was using it. And then I came to a point when I thought, I still want to use it. It's really useful for my work. And I will talk about this in the second half of the show. But I don't want to endorse the using of it anymore because I'm worried about quite a few things. And my friend Mark Kilby, I was having this conversation with him because we've talked a lot about it, and he also thinks a lot about the use of generative AI, and he uses a lot also in his work in different ways. He's always experimenting in different ways with it too. And he said, well, why don't you talk about it in the podcast? And I thought, great, I'll talk about this book about artificial intelligence and the effect it's having on our lives. And then in the second part, I'll share some of the ways in which I'm using generative AI in particular for myself. Well, in particular, no, in which I'm using generative AI for myself. So I'm going to start with, with a sentence I really liked because it summarizes also what I think is the issue with generative AI and technology in general. This sentence is, the problem that we have is not the algorithms, but the humans. And especially in reading this book, I thought it is such a shame because we've got a tool that can help the world be a much better place. It can help to solve a lot of problems. But from what I read in the book, the use of it never goes far enough, as in the consequences are not looked at, the ramifications are not looked at, making sure that it's used properly, making sure the right people are using it, making sure that projects that followed through all the way are not left halfway through and just let's see what happens. Yeah, so the book, so Code Dependent, it has a little bit of a pessimistic tint on it, given what it's sharing. But I think near the end, especially, it does have a little bit more of an optimistic tint. And it's not a doom and gloom. It's giving you stories and ways in which it's been used. And you can see what the issues are for yourself as well as them being pointed out. So I really recommend it. I've recommended it a lot. It's really easy to read. So in relation to cybercrime and deep fakes, and I'll talk about that in a second, it says all crimes are happening offline, because everyone they're happening to is a human being and not a computer. The online component is just the weapon that's being used, not the crime itself. Anytime someone talks to me about their cyber stalking or online harassment, I say no. It's just stalking or just harassment. This is actually a quote from someone that the author was interviewing. But you can see that, and I think that it is such a part of our lives that whatever happens online, again, we must not forget who it's happening to. And so if you want to check out the book, just a trigger warning in a way, or just a caution that there's a chapter I found particularly disturbing, and this is not usually the case when I read non-fiction or business books like this. It was chapter 2 where it talks about deep fakes, and in particular pornographic related deep fakes and the effects this has had on the people who've been the victims of that. So just to let you know, I'm not going to go any more into that chapter, but I will carry on now. But I just wanted to warn you about that. Interestingly enough, and this is something that I found very uplifting actually, is, and I quote, this is from the author, "Through my journey reporting on the effects of AI on human beings, healthcare was the one area where the technology felt like it had genuinely life-changing potential." And this is really amazing. And she goes on to tell about the different ways in which artificial intelligence has been used in rural areas, which means that doctors can go a little bit deeper and get deeper results on people they are seeing who've come a very long way, and you really don't want them to have to come back. So that's a really good way. But of course, there are issues. So let's have a look at some of the quotes around that topic. The author talks about a time when they found that they could diagnose some of the issues through AI and with AI in a faster way than you could just with consultants in a rural area. And so they started to offer this service. But what happened once the clinics started to offer this service? AI-enabled diagnostics were being offered as a premium service, an added package if you want to pay for it. That's the market today. So you see, even when we've got a good thing and we've got a good tool that can help us provide a better service to people who are in the middle of nowhere, for example, or for any kind of person that has difficulty in accessing a service, still, where's the business opportunity? And this is what we're coming across all the time, that even though the tools can be used for good, for a lot of good, as again, the humans just finding something that just dampens that benefit. And there's another issue. Even with things like this, where we're looking at how we collect data that can then be inputted into the AI systems that can help with healthcare, there's another issue. The data collected by these companies from poor and rural Indians might result in expensive technology that will benefit those customers, including governments, who can afford to pay, and exclude the marginalized patients that helped build them. That is one of the issues, actually, that stops me from in any way advocating or encouraging the use of some of these tools, is what's happening behind the scenes. And there's an earlier reference to this in the first chapter when they're looking at the moderation of content in, I think it was one of Meta's products. Again, similarly, all the data workers I met with were vulnerable, either transitory and unsettled, or struggling to make ends meet. They had essentially no bargaining power at all. And this is something that we came across, I think, when ChatGPT started to become quite popular, that the people who have to look at whether things are acceptable or not, whether there were things that should be censored or not in either social media or in the data feeding to ChatGPT, the people doing it were in conditions where actually they've got to do this job. Sometimes this involved looking at really horrible images and describing them or tagging them with not acceptable, etc. And again, this is another problem. Very similarly, as the example I gave you about the medical example, rules around more equitable pay and working conditions and better middle management to give workers autonomy and voice have to be strengthened before the AI industry entrenches itself into the mainstream consumer tech market and the practices solidify. There's all of this going on, and it's For me, it's one of my the pleasures of reading books for me is that I get all of these things from maybe articles, conversations, things I hear, and I then get this information consolidated for me in a book form. And it was hitting this book that everything just fell into place for me. We all have different ways of absorbing the world. Then this brings me to a bigger problem, and again, one that is actually being quite visible lately. I am Spanish and British now, and living in London, and my view of the world is quite, I feel very European, let's just say that. And I am very conscious that the companies who are behind the technology that are getting more and more powerful all come from one country. They're all US based. And this is not about my relationship with the US. It's about my relationship with one country having so much power over the rest of the world. And the fact that it still matters, I think, who you give your money to in business. And there's a lot, I don't look at wherever all my pennies go and where they work originates and where the outsourcing goes, because otherwise I couldn't. I'm not that person. I wish I was sometimes. Basically, what I'm saying is I've also sometimes used services and buy products from questionable companies. But in this case, it's just so visible. And it starts to worry me. And going back to the example about the health, how the artificial intelligence is being used health in rural India, there's a reflection here from one of the people that the author interviewed. And they say, what we are seeing playing out in India and the global south more broadly, she told me, is a form of digital colonialism, where a lot of data is being collected from citizens with little value add on the ground and maximum value extraction by tech corporations. For me, it's just the digital colonialism is how it's referred to. At one level, it's exploitation. At another level, you're just outsourcing. So, but again, I think it's worth just remember that. And then this comes from another person. All conflict is ultimately caused by power. Tech companies that operate across borders with their billions of users hold immense power today and have an outsized impact on the world, reminiscent of the ancient role of religions in society. Our role is to remind the tech companies of the follies of power. I think that's what the book does. I think that's a good summary of the book, actually. So that's kind of broadly speaking. I do have other things to share with you. Let's just see. Then we've got some nice definitions, of course, at the beginning, like AI is a complex statistical software applied to finding patterns in large sets of real-world data. I think this is really important because at the moment we're talking a lot about, I hear a lot of AI is this, AI is that, when actually what we're talking about is generative AI, the large language models. But of course, artificial intelligence has been around for a very long time, completely embedded in some of our day-to-day interactions. And it's all about statistics. So it's all about collecting data, making sense of the data, and then doing something with the data. And another quote, scalable systems like machine learning are built to benefit large groups, but tend to work well at the expense of some. Again, I'm just going to leave that quote there. But again, it's what we saw with remote work as well. See, some sectors of the population and some groups will gain great benefits from remote work, but we are in the danger of leaving other people behind if we don't look at things properly. It's really complicated. Something I'm realizing is that technology is amazing, but the implementation of it is just really complicated. So before I go into vocabulary, let me see. So the other thing is as well, so we've got the effect of what happens as technologies feed the algorithm, let's just say like that, as companies use people to feed the algorithm. And then, of course, it's the fact that governments use a lot of the technology for infrastructure. So something else that the book points out, a lot of infrastructure and expertise that shapes how the government thinks about AI is coming from big tech. They are filling a gap in state capacity. So this is interesting that sometimes it's almost like it's being delegated to the companies, some of the work, some of the infrastructure. During the pandemic in 2020, for instance, it became clear that the Mexican government needed Google's help to craft its own internal health policy. So then you've got the other side as well, is that how much then is business completely integrated, not just into the infrastructure, but into the decision making. So again, it's worth thinking about. Right, so I hope this is not all sounding really depressing, but I think there is so much about the great things that artificial intelligence can do and the potential of it that I think, well, this is where I'm at the moment, so this is what I'm sharing with you. This one really illustrates something I was talking about earlier in this case. So there is one of the chapters about how artificial intelligence can be used to understand some of society's issues and help governments design solutions. So something that's really stayed on my mind is this example about trying to use an algorithm to identify the people who are most at risk and most vulnerable in a society. So this is very specific. This is something that happened in a rural area of Argentina. Two people, I think they were brothers, who wanted to understand and to improve an area because they could see that there was a lot of deprivation there was a lot of crime, and they decided to focus on two issues: teen pregnancy and school truancy. So the example in the book focuses mainly on teen pregnancy. And what they found was this area, there was a very high proportion of teen pregnancies, of people having children quite early on, and of people having a lot of children as well, up to 12, lots of children. And so they thought that what this is doing is this putting the families at risk, and there's just a lot of poverty in the area. Microsoft got involved, and it says Microsoft's developers pitched the Albeleiras, were the two brothers, about the power of AI, claiming that they could use Microsoft's Azure software to build algorithms to predict which girls were likely to get pregnant in their teens. That way, the local government could direct its public resources to those families and help prevent them. This is the idea that we can use artificial intelligence to help us be ahead of a problem. The idea of using artificial intelligence to solve a messy human problem like teenage pregnancies delighted Pablo. Pablo is the guy behind this. So they're saying, well, we had a lot of data and it was really difficult to analyze, of course. Then there was some issues with this. For example, the adolescent focus of the AI model was problematic for several reasons. Argentina's minimum age of consent is 13, but the criminal code offers heightened protection of children aged between 13 and 16 in regard to sexual exploitation. The AI model, however, assumed all the girls in the program were of the age of consent, that is, over 16, even when they were younger. And even for those above 16, it didn't consider that the pregnancies could be a result of rape. So it's very complex, and we're trying to simplify it by using an algorithm. So that is something that, again, until you read something like this, you don't really, I didn't really get it. There is something very interesting as well in this, is that the book refers to, which says, the data collection process treated the young women as passive. So this is happening to women who are doing that, or who their day-to-day is like this, or who've made certain choices, who haven't been able to access certain opportunities. It's just like, this is just happening to women. They're just getting pregnant as a teenager. Critics viewed the algorithm as an over-designed, imperfect tool attempting to somehow, quote, fix the girls, rather than the social fractures causing their predicament. The data collected excluded men. So we're looking at teenage pregnancy without taking into account what the society, the context around them is really doing, and without taking into account the other half of the issue, which is the men who are getting the women pregnant. Again, this is finding, great, technology is going to help us, and they're not really trying to use it as best as possible. And then this is a final reflection on this. This is the investigator. I believe that Pablo's intentions and the aims of the AI technology were good. To identify families that needed additional help and to find it for them before they ended up with difficult situations, such as dealing with unwanted pregnancies. However, I found that no one took responsibility for the outcomes of the system. Basically, what happened is they got all this data, then nothing really happened with it. And my sense was as well that sometimes these projects run out of funding halfway through and then nothing happens. So I've got more examples, but I think I'm going to leave it there because they're not the most cheery. So I'm just going to give you one more little bit because I think this is where we are now in a way. As in, we're now with generative AI, it's kind of taking off, isn't it? But there's all these questions coming up, and it's fantastic that there's so much debate and so much pushback and support, and hopefully there's being some interesting conversations going on. And near the end of the book, it does focus on generative AI, and it does say that one thing that has happened is, for example, 3 religious figureheads got together at one point in Rome to try and draft some principles for which AI designers could live by. And the author says, this the first time that these 3 faiths had come together and signed a joint declaration on anything. And it was the figureheads were an Islamic legal scholar, a rabbi from Jerusalem, and a Catholic archbishop. And they signed this pact about what they thought that AI companies should be doing, AI designers, the principles they should be basing their designs on. And they included making AI systems explainable, inclusive, unbiased, reproducible, privacy protecting, and accountable, meaning they required a human being to take responsibility for any AI facilitated decision. I was really pleased to see that this had happened. Just the fact that, for once, that the different religions could actually see beyond their cultures and go, this is really worth coming together for, and this is what we are worried about. So I think that's a good end to the book, but I'll give you a little bit of vocabulary. So we've got AI alignment, which is making software compatible with human society. There is GPT. What does GPT mean, everyone, dear listener? The generative pre-trained transformer. I don't think I knew that. And then we already came across data colonialism, the extractive act of profiteering of the data of marginalized and vulnerable people to build AI systems. And then automation bias. As the use of AI becomes widespread, its users must become wary of automation bias, a widely studied phenomenon in which people start to become over-reliant on automation to do their jobs. I would say now over-reliant on generative AI to do their jobs, and I will come to that in a second. Good. So yeah, there is a chapter on ChatGPT and the issues and the benefits there, for example. And I heard on a podcast, I saw they referred to this case quite recently as well. So maybe there haven't been that many. And it was a man named Cooper said ChatGPT saved his dog Sassy's life after a veterinarian failed to diagnose her correctly. And this was somebody, basically, their dog was ill. They couldn't get an answer from their vet. They went into ChatGPT and just managed to, through the use of generative AI, and I imagine some internet searches, managed to find a cure for the dog. So amazing. So I like to leave on that positive note, but I really recommend, if you're interested in any of this, to read Code Dependent, How AI is Changing Our Lives by Madhumita Murgia. Right, so now you might understand my predicament of not wanting to share in public a lot about how I use generative AI, because I don't want to be seen as endorsing its use because of all of this, because of everything I said before. I'm not going to repeat it. So I will be talking about a few ways in which I use it in a second. But before I do that, I'd like to just go back to something else I'm reading. So I'm reading at the moment, I'm dipping in and out of Meditation for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And I mentioned it last week when I was talking about 4,000 Weeks, which I really liked. And Meditation for Mortals, to be honest, it's brief chapters about different reflections on life. And in a way, for me, it's a follow-up from 4,000 Weeks because many of the things that he touched on there are then coming back. So things like, you've only got a finite number of days in this world, pick your battles. And I like it. I'm reading it just over my second breakfast for like about 6 minutes. That's how long it's taking me to read a chapter. And I just wanted to check this because I imagine that if you're listening to this, we've either met or you've been a listener of the show for long, or you really like books. So in Meditation for Mortals, there is a chapter about the overload of information, and it talks about books and the piles of books, to read books that we've got. I've got loads. Fortunately, there's some pieces of advice for navigating a world of infinite information that are genuinely helpful. The first, and it's the only one I'm going to share here, is to treat your to-read pile like a river, not a bucket. That is to say, think of your backlog not as a container that gradually fills up and that it's your job to empty, but as a stream that flows past you, from which you get to pick a few choice items here and there without feeling guilty for letting all the others float by. I'm taking that, definitely. So now I'm going to try and keep this brief just because, of course, I could have a whole show around this, let alone just a bit of an episode. But mainly, I have been using ChatGPT mainly and Notebook LM with the book I'm working on now, which is called All the World's a Workplace. And again, for those of you that might have just joined me recently, this book mixes my experience of remote work with some also research and conversations with other people, about 12 aspects of it. And then to make it a little bit more me, I've used adaptations of Shakespeare scenes or monologues just to go a little bit deeper into the emotional experience of remote work, and also to get out of my skin and get out of my bubbles skin and just get out of the general narrative as well by just going into something completely random, which is, I don't know, to be or not to be, to work from home or not to work from home. Is this a Zoom link, which I see before me? And things like that. And it's been great fun. And I have to say that the feedback on that aspect of it has been quite good. So I'm very pleased with that. So I used ChatGPT to do those very first drafts of the Shakespeare. I played a lot with it. I would feed it and say, okay, can you take this scene from Macbeth or this speech, like, is this a dagger, which I see before me? And can you make it, is this a Zoom link, which I see before me? Although maybe I said, is this a meeting? And then ChatGPT changed to Zoom link. I don't remember. And this is one of the beauties and dangers of working like this with a tool, is that at some point, I don't know where my thoughts and its thoughts started. And I can't be bothered to go back to the chat to look at it because it goes back a couple of years. But that was it. And then after I've seen which ones worked, which ones didn't, there was one chapter where I just went over so many scenes and I just could not find the right scene to do it. So anyway, I've done loads. I go backwards and forwards, and now I've got something again, which has been the original ChatGPT, lots of modifications, me changing things, me going back to the original Shakespeare and bringing back more of that into the adaptation. So that's been one way. I use it a lot for transitions when something that's happening in the edits a lot. Especially in the hybrid chapter, there's just so much new information. And I'll come back to something and go, can you summarize this? Or I'll just say, okay, I want to say this, and I'll write 5 sentences verbatim without thinking about how to make them sound nice or clear. And then I'll give it to ChatGPT and say, can you just clean this up? Because I'm now at the stage that if I have to wait for 2 hours to write 5 lines, it will take me ages to go through my final draft. So this is one way of making sure it's my ideas. ChatGPT already understands my style, or I can give it the whole chapter and say, use that style. I can see the ChatGPT style, and I'm learning a lot about myself as a narrator, so I can then change it if I need to. But it just means instead of spending 2 hours for 5 lines, now at this stage, I can spend 15 minutes. And if you are trying to write a lot, like I'm trying to do, I'm not succeeding, I'm very slow still, then I need this. And also motivation-wise, just think of the motivation of a writer is such a joy, but it can feel like such a slog. And suddenly you've got something that really accelerates your process and that helps you get your idea sorted in writing faster and sometimes better. I don't have to now wait for the editor to come in. The editor can do much more big overview things that ChatGPT still is not great at. It's good. NotebookLM is better, I think. It can look at the nuances. It can look at what might a human reader be thinking that ChatGPT still hasn't got. So it's good from that point of view. And also for transitions, I use it as well. Like if I've got one of these new ideas, I put it in and then I'm like, oh, now my book is quite tight. As in I've managed through all the processes to get it to flow from one section to the other in a chapter, that whenever I put a new bit of information, I have to change quite a bit around it. So ChatGPT helps me with that. Sometimes it's terrible and sometimes it nails it quite quickly. Just to say, I've put this in here. I then need to go into this other section. Can you just give me a line? Or how can I change the next paragraph? So that's very useful for that. And I am really, really fond of NotebookLM, which is the Google program that amazingly is free. And for working on my own things, I'm finding it fantastic. And also when I know what I want to draw from research-wise, I can feed it some PDFs and things, and then I can work on that, because ChatGPT is still for me really unreliable, and I prefer NotebookLM, and it's just the interface. It's more of a study space. Again, I think I've realized I'm quite visual, so what digital space I'm working in, what it looks like, affects how I work and affects my connection with it. So something I've done, I uploaded the whole draft of All the World's the Workplace, and I got NotebookLM to do the summaries at the end, because I'm very, very bad at that, because I'm very bad at drawing practical applications from my thoughts. I'm a philosopher, not an instructor. I even call myself a Pilates practitioner, not an instructor, because I don't like to give instructions. I love to debate. I love to share my opinion. I love to encourage people to work in a certain way, but I'm not very good at those bullet points. I think it's done a very good job of doing something that I don't enjoy doing as well. Sometimes also just having someone else, even if it's a bot, look at your writing and drawing the learnings from it is actually better. And then I'm now just playing with it with this, and also with Connection and Disconnection in remote teams. I'm now playing with what it's called the studio in NotebookLM, where you can create slides, quite cool ones, where you can create briefing documents, where it was quite famous at one point because it has a really good system. It calls it a podcast, but basically what it does is it creates a conversation between two people about the sources you've given it, so the work you've given it. So you've probably heard of this. You feed it something, say you feed it my book, and then it creates a 12 minutes of two people talking about it. That's quite fun, because again, it's about, okay, how might someone interpret what I'm saying, or what might they say about it? And that's always interesting. But then I found that you can actually get it to create that audio, and then there is a function where you can interrupt them. So it's a man and a woman with American voices, and they talk and they go, oh, this is very interesting. And then you press the button to either join or whatever. And they say, oh, hang on. Someone wants to ask a question. And then you ask them a question like, so that thing that you said, how do you think the author does that? Or what is it that you mostly enjoyed about that part? And it replies to you. you then don't get, when you then get the MP3 file, you get the original 12 minutes. You don't get all these interjections, which is a shame. But isn't it fun? And again, if you find that they say something, you might ask them. And remember, they're really drawing from other data. I don't know what the difference is between, for example, NotebookLM and ChatGPT, how the data is inputted. But they're talking about your work, and they're going to, in trying to reply to you, they're going to draw back from your work. So again, I found that fascinating. And I did it one day. I just thought I'd tell you about it. The one thing I'm going to definitely use NotebookLM for it when I'm done with the final draft before it goes to the publishers. So before they do their final draft with the proofreading and copy editing and polishing it properly, is I'll just ask it to do a table of all the people I've referenced in the book. I could do it and it would be quite fun. I'd rather get on with the next book. And then I can just get the table, then check it, but it's faster to check than it is to draft. So it's wonderful to have these tools. And I just wish that, to be completely honest, I just wish a European company had one of these and I could support them and get their technology rather than being supporting all the organizations in one country in the world. And again, and there is all the ethical dilemmas about how they're built, etc. And the fact that, not everyone can access them, even though they're free and stuff. And then I'm not going to get into what they do with the data you put in and the privacy and all of that. And that's a whole new thing. But yeah, so thanks, friend Mark Kilby, who's not a bot, for suggesting I talk about it in the podcast. I could go on and on, but listeners, if you've made it this far and you have any questions, then let me know. I'm very happy to answer them either in next episode or in private through email, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. I will come back with more updates about Pilates, about when I eventually get back to my cozy mystery, about the singing, which I'm still enjoying. But the next episode, hopefully, if all goes to plan, will be myself and Bri Kajati talking about connection and disconnection in remote teams. So we'll look at loneliness and connection, but mainly anything that we didn't say in the book that we would love to say. And then we'll do a little update so that you can also hear from Bri. So yes, for the first time in a while, we'll have two voices in an episode, and I hope you will join me then. Thank you very, very, very much for listening.